Welcome to Growth Colony, Australia's B2B podcast. I'm Alex from Xgrowth. Each episode, we bring you B2B founders, CMOs, marketing and sales leaders to find out what makes them successful and what was behind their failures, or as we like to call them, hard-learned lessons. If you enjoy the episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and share the pod with a friend you think could get value out of it. And of course, make sure to join the community Slack channel at growthcolony.org/Slack. That's enough from me though, let's dive right in.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Shahin Hoda with Xgrowth, and today I'm talking to Nicholas Kontopoulos, APAC Regional Head of Marketing at Adobe, about how can marketers sharpen their senses when it comes to sales and understanding the sales process, why that's important, and how it can benefit you in the long term. On that note, let's dive in. Nicholas, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, mate. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation.
Super excited about this, and I think it's a really important topic to discuss that arrangement between sales and marketing. And I'm really excited to talk about this with you, considering you've had a sales background and now you're in a marketing role, and really bring the best of the two worlds together. So, I guess the first thing that I want to ask is, why should marketers care about that? Why should marketers develop an understanding of sales?
I think it's a great question to lead out with. And, let's be honest, sales can be a tough audience. As you said, my background's sales, and, sales historically have been, the culture that's been cultivated has been one of, lone wolf, type mentality. They're out fighting the good fight. They own the relationships historically. If you go right back, they tended to be the main interlock point for between a customer and a brand. So they had a lot of influence and power historically as well within an organization. Obviously, that's evolved over years, and more so in the last 10 to 5. It's got that dynamics changed significantly, and that was sort of what drew me into the world of marketing as well. I saw that shift in terms of the roles between the two sort of key functions within an organization. If I'm honest, but sales and marketing to me, I think, are critical functions. I mean, all functions play an important role, but certainly in terms of when it comes to the perception of how a brand is perceived in the market, and ultimately how customers think about it, is often as a direct consequence of your sales and marketing efforts. So I think it's important for marketers to really understand sales. I think that's, if there's one thing I do feel that has been a problem for a lot of B2B organizations, has been the fact that marketing and sales have sort of seen themselves as not necessarily joined at the hip. They've operated independently of one another. And I really do think it's important for marketers to really, look at how they can engage with sales in a way that drives mutual benefit for both of them. Yeah. I often say you got to see them, first and foremost as an internal customer. We as marketers are trained to look at our customers, to really understand what makes them tick, to build persona maps, for example. That's something that in more recent years became sort of an area of focus for a lot of marketers, is to build, persona maps and customer journey maps, and I really encourage marketers to think in a similar light in how they build a persona map of their sales organization, and the sellers, from a sales leader to a seller to a BDR, inside sales, because each of them will have different sort of, hopes and fears, so we really need to understand those hopes and fears and what drives and what makes them tick. What are they, what are their objectives, what are their needs? And I think if marketers invest time in understanding sales through that sort of approach, that will help build, better insights in how they can better partner with them, in the future. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I love that. Hey, you say it, sales is potentially marketers' customer. I think I read this yesterday that someone was saying, marketers have 2 customers that they got to serve, and one is the actual customer. And guess who the second one is? Sales.
It's sales.
And I think it's hard sometimes. Sometimes, I feel like marketers are proud and they're like, what we're doing is important. And then when you talk about, hey, these are your customers, you really need in B2B, there's definitely an element that marketing needs to support sales is becomes a little bit of a, sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow for marketers, I feel, maybe because they look at it differently. Have you come across that concept that marketers are like, I'm not going to do that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think sometimes it's also just down to, the fact, like I sort of alluded to earlier, there was historical, a culture within sales that they were effectively worshipped. I mean, in some respects, if you look at how, the sales organization, they have their, obviously their, what's it called? Once a year, the winners club, they get to go off and celebrate. They're basically, held up to the whole company and look at these amazing individuals and what they've achieved and truly have achieved some really great works, because being a seller is hard. As you said, I've carried a sales bag. It's one of the loneliest places you can be inside of a company. I mean, you've got a lot of pressure, and depending on the company you work for, you live or die by the quarter and the result you're delivering. So that's why I appreciate the role of sales, obviously having been out there. And I think this is where it can be a bit of a challenge if you haven't been exposed to what's involved in actually being a seller, how dependent you are on the rest of the organization also to deliver on the brand promises you're making. Yeah. So each and every day, a seller's out there making promises. We've got an amazing product. It's going to transform you. They're very dependent on the rest of the organization to actually deliver against that. And marketing plays a big role there. However, that said, the way I look at it, as a marketer, you have to be invested in understanding your sales organization, because at the end of the day, what's our job? Our job is to bring a customer and seller together, to have a conversation that leads to hopefully that customer seeing that our company can actually provide a solution to their needs that is going to help them transform their organization. It's going to help elevate their own profile in that organization. So it's really important that marketers understand that at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. All of our efforts all come to that moment when we can bring a customer and prospect customer together with a seller for that, hopefully what will be a meaningful conversation. And that's why the alignment between sales and marketing is so important, because the story that's maybe led to that conversation happening 9 times out of 10 now starts with marketing. And this is the big shift. This is the big change that's happened in that sort of 10-year period I referenced earlier. Historically, when I started in sales, I tended to bring the relationship into the business. I tended to be the one that was that key catalyst for that deal to ultimately become what it did become. I still had support, don't get me wrong, but I was bringing those names into the database as such. However, now we know that's not the case. Most journeys start with a Google search, keyword search. Most customers will start with a question, who's the best marketing automation provider out there, et cetera. And that's the big change. I remember having a conversation with one of my sales leaders, and we, most of my career is spent in the technology side has been about selling solutions that solve problems for marketers and sellers. Yeah. So I remember having this conversation with one of my sales leaders saying, look, we talk about journey starting online, yada, yada. Have we ever thought about what that means for us internally as a sales and marketing leader? I mean, if we're telling our customers that 60% of the journey begins, where interactions begin before they've even spoken to a seller, what does that mean for us? And I remember that being sort of a key moment for me in my career, and how I started making some changes around how we aligned with sales and sort of build a demand to revenue model around that. And I think that's really important. Yeah. So really understanding sales is quite critical. And how can you do that? Again, you don't have to do 20 years in sales like I did.
That's definitely my next question. That's definitely it. Let's say I'm a marketer, right? And I join an organization. Yeah. So where do I start? It feels a little bit intimidating. I'm new. I'm junior. There are these, and in a lot of organizations, sales team are still put on a pedestal, and they're not very approachable. What do I do? What is the first step that me as a marketer, junior marketer, starting in an organization, or might not be even a junior, I'm a manager starting in an organization, wanting to understand sales a little bit more? What should I do? Where do I start?
Okay, if we come at, I'm just seeing where they go with a junior person or manager first. Well, if I was a manager, I would create an environment where hopefully there's an opportunity for us to get our marketers embedded with our junior marketers embedded with the sales teams to go out and do, ride shotgun with them, or be part of calls, discovery calls, to be engaged with that sales cycle, early on, to sit with the inside sales team and listen to how calls, how they run their calls, spend time with the BDR. So creating an environment where my marketing team can get exposed to that would definitely be one of the first areas I'd start, and something I try to do with my own organization. It got a little bit difficult now, obviously, with the environment we're operating in, with people having to work remotely, but there's still no reason why someone can't dial in and listen in on a call, and it's a great way for marketers to also hear directly from the customer. What are those messages that the seller's using that are connecting, that I can then maybe bring back into the business. So there is a mutual benefit for sales to see that as well. And that's how you can architect that with the sales organization leadership team, by saying, we'd love to embed our marketing team in a rotational way, where they're being, a fly on the wall, so we can take those insights back into the business to help improve the content we're delivering you, that can then ultimately then drive more effective conversations. So you can package it up that way. As a junior marketer, obviously the value there is you're getting richer insights in terms of learning what your internal customer requirements are and needed, and also again, you develop a deeper appreciation and ultimately, hopefully, empathy for the salesperson in terms of what they're having to do, and seeing, it isn't a walk in the park. You have your good customers, your easy customers, and you have your very difficult customers. And seeing that, I think, will help inform them and maybe change some perceptions that exist in the organization. But you have to have an open mindset. I think it's a mindset thing as well. So you need to make sure that you're doing that. To architect that requires obviously having, a sales leadership team that's open and responsive, or, willing to do that. And again, I think that's where the manager can lead that effort in helping build that sort of consensus with the sales team, that this is something that could be beneficial for them. But yeah, you need to go in with an open mindset. You need to put aside any sort of preconceived ideas you might have of what the seller's job is like. And again, I think that could actually help accelerate that. Because I think sometimes marketers might think the salespeople, all they do is go out and have lunches and play golf, which is, I think an unfair assessment of what's involved in their day-to-day job.
Yeah, that's a very good point. One of the things that I found working with either our clients but interacting with marketers in sales, I've also found that sales usually has a lot more, much better understanding, much more granular understanding of the customer than marketers do. And if we're trying to put a campaign together, if I just speak to marketing, I end up with a bland campaign, and I have to get that kind of that crispy, granular insights from sales. What is your experience with that, and marketers getting that information from sales?
Couldn't agree more. Again, as we sort of touched on, sales does have that proximity to the customer that we don't have as marketers. Marketing, if you want to think about it, we sell at 40,000 feet, whereas because we're all in sales. This is the other thing that's really important, actually, I meant to mention earlier. I remember reading an article once where a CEO used to walk around asking everyone in the business what their value proposition to sales is. Yeah, everyone. He asked everyone, like not just marketing. He asked finance and procurement. I loved it. I love that, because at the end of the day, we're all in sales. We all play a role in a deal getting closed. Yeah, so we need to understand that, and I think in terms of that's a great area to start with, in terms of thinking about what is the value proposition you have, how do you support sales, and what is the value you're bringing to the table. Can you just touch back on your question again, because I've just lost my thread?
No, I want to talk about that. That sounds interesting. So the CEO went around asking what your value proposition is to the sales team.
Yes,
so 100%. Not what's the value proposition of our company. What's your value proposition to the sales team?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the sales organization, and you could expand this then to include customer success teams as well. So once you onboard a customer, because they play a role in arguably you could say it's it's still a sales role because they're still working with the customer, upselling, cross-selling. In a lot of cases, they carry numbers in that respect. So if you think about that, it's bringing new customers in, and then obviously keeping those customers, and then upselling, cross-selling, selling into them. The rest of the organization needs to look at how is it supporting that. I give you a simple example. I remember having an argument with the procurement team, over onboarding an agency, that was going to play quite a critical role for me in delivering on a core element of my go-to-market. And I remember we were getting into this tussle. They were saying, we have a 3-month process that we need to work through, whatever it was. I can't remember the specifics, but I remember asking the individual what their value proposition to sales was, taking this idea and putting it into flight. And it was really interesting because the individual I was dealing with was stumped. She didn't know the answer to the question. And I said, listen, here, let me help you here. Your value proposition is helping me engage with the parties I need to engage with to create the pipeline that ultimately will convert into leads that will convert into pipeline that will ultimately help our sellers get to their revenue targets. And it's a great example of how all the different roles still play. I mean, she has an impact, in this case, has an impact on revenue if by not helping me get to where I need to get to. So I think when you approach things like that and think of it through that lens, it actually helps you build a unified approach around how you organize yourselves and ultimately serving the the customers as well as the sellers' needs. Yeah. So
right.
Yeah, it was a really great.
Nicholas, was that the last time that you used that phrase?
I've got another what's it called?
Every single time somebody says no to sales, you just turn around and be like, sorry, what is your value prop to sales? Can you just remind me of that again?
Well, I coined
and then define it for them.
This is it. Well, the other thing I have, as a bit of a joke, is the SPU. Are you part of the SPU? And people look at you and go, what's that? And I say sales prevention unit, so that's the other area that, and again, it's a serious amount. I don't want to diminish the role of these supporting functions because they play critical, and again, they play critical roles in ensuring the business doesn't wander into territory it shouldn't wander into by, forging a partnership with a partner that maybe is insolvent, so there's legitimacy around sort of what they're trying to do. But what happens as companies get bigger, they can become you can get rigidity, they become rigid, in terms of, and there's a sort of status quo type mentality that starts creeping into the business. And that's a massive red flag for any company. And once you start hearing, oh, this is the way we've always done things, that should be an immediate flag for anyone to start thinking, well, maybe it isn't, it's time to rethink that. So yeah, that gets back to, because if you look at a lot of the frustrations that sales organizations often have, it is that sort of lack of, support that they will often say that they're getting in terms of helping them get across the line, So from a marketer's perspective, that's where I try to ensure that the way we operate doesn't become rigid. It enables us to have that flexibility and to be nimble enough to make those adjustments that are needed. Yeah.
Got it. The other question that I was asking was about, from my own experience, I find that, in a lot of situations, when I'm designing a campaign, a lot of the wood for the fire of the campaign comes from sales, the insights that we want to create. And
that's right. I remember you asking that. So
what is your experience with that?
Yeah, again, it's a great question, and I do definitely want to answer that. So I'm glad you brought us back to that one. 100% bring them in. You should bring sales into the process of creating content. Yeah. If you're going to create content campaigns, having them involved in the process serves so many purposes. Yeah. First of all, it helps ensure that you are focusing on the right potential problems. Yeah. And ultimately proposing the right solutions to those problems. Yeah. As we've already touched on, they have that proximity to the customer. Yeah. And they're having those conversations. So obviously talking to customers and sellers is quite a critical component in building out any sort of campaign. It's something that we're trying to bring into our mix, is not just the sales, but also having customer, content councils. Yeah, where you actually have a customer, sellers, and even the channel, partners involved in that process. What are the product? Because that's the other one. Channel partners are also an important part of the mix. They're also having a lot of regular contact with customers. And we work very closely with our partners as well in terms of creating content. So bringing those individuals in gives you that richness of insight. Also, the other cool thing is it helps you achieve your goal, because if you're creating content they're bought into, you're then creating you're creating a red thread that then can run through the whole campaign from creating the brand awareness, side of things, right through to hopefully seeing that convert into revenue, because the seller is using the same language. There's the messaging that you all have aligned around on. And more importantly, the customers had a consistent experience across that. That to me is really, that's where a lot of marketing falls away when you don't have that interlock with the sales organization. You can go create a beautiful campaign that gets engagement, but if the seller is using a completely different storyline, once the lead gets passed over to them, the customer gets a disjointed experience and says, "Oh, okay, that wasn't what I was originally, buying into," or your campaign falls over at the start because it's not getting engagement, because the story you're telling or the problem you think you're trying to solve for isn't a problem for the customer in actual fact, and you miss that because you haven't spoken to your sales or channel or the customer themselves. So yeah, I think bringing them into the mix is quite a crucial component, and more so in that they, if you get them in, that then they're invested in it, and then you're both building a campaign or content that you've got skin in the game. Yeah. So if no one can complain, it's like, hey, well, we built this with you. And I find that you don't get a lot of complaints back from the sellers then, because they know that if it didn't work, we're both invested in making that bit of content come to life. And for whatever reason, if it didn't work, we can go back to the drawing board and look at, okay, how do we learn from that?
And I feel like sales puts an extra effort in those situations to, whether they're using that content in their outreach sequence, or whether, the way they're talking to customers and they bring this content, they push it a lot harder versus here's a content piece for you sales team
100%,
and enjoy.
100%. And I'm truly lucky that we've got some really great sales leaders as well as sellers in the mix and solution. I think when we talk about sales, you got obviously the seller, him or herself, that's out, owning the responsibility of bringing customers in or creating those conversations in conjunction with us. But then you got the solution sales organization. They're really like in technology in particular, you have a big, solution sales organizations play quite a critical role, and they have a lot of knowledge. Those individuals tend to have a lot of, industry and process knowledge around how a company operates and how they, how our solutions help solve for that. So we tend to work quite closely also with the solution sales teams as well.
Got it. That makes sense. Now, one of the things that I wanted to, and this is a conversation we previously had, and I'd like to maybe dig a little bit deeper into this. You have a concept at Adobe called brand to revenue framework. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people will be interested as well of what's the ethos behind that? Why did it get created and what's it for?
All right. So if you think about any business, all businesses are all unified around the need to create profit. Yeah. And you need to be building and growing. Yeah. They need to grow and be profitable in that growth. Yeah. So revenue is quite a key anchor point that I think is critical for all marketers to be focused on when it comes to sales. Yeah, because at the end of the day, they're measured and they live and die by their revenue number that they own. And ultimately, I believe marketers should use the revenue and pipeline numbers as their two core KPIs. Now, not just to pay lip service to it. I mean, a lot of marketers will say, yeah, I'm revenue focused, etc. But I mean, really anchored against that, in terms of, if specifically on the pipeline number as the first category and secondary, the revenue. And why I put it in that order is because we create pipeline, then obviously the seller takes ownership of that, and then it's up to them to then bring it home. Now we still support them through that process, but there is they take the lead once it goes from pipe. Once it becomes pipe, they take the lead and then converting it, and we support it. So I see the priority for me and my team is building the pipe, and then ultimately, but I still want to see that pipe convert, so we stay invested all the way through. So the revenue element's quite important to that, brand to revenue model. So we use that. We go from revenue, and we reverse engineer back from there. Okay, in order to get to that revenue number, what do we need to do? So you use a reverse waterfall model. You start building out your pipeline point of view in terms of what you need to get in terms of pipeline in order to get to that revenue number, and then you need to start thinking about, okay, how do I build the pipeline that's needed to help us get to revenue? I then need to start thinking about the campaigns, and ultimately, that then leads you to then start thinking about, okay, I need to create brand awareness and all the good stuff that happens in between that. So having a clear framework and model that thinks about everything from revenue and reverse engineers itself back to then creating, brand awareness is really critical. And then understanding the key interlock points there. So when you think about it, there's a lot of different stakeholders involved in that. You've got everyone from comms teams to sales teams to inside outside sales channel, BDR teams, etc. And then the partnerships, the ecosystem. There's a whole ecosystem that builds around that you need to think about. In-source, outsource, so you've got, third-party agencies you're working with that are supporting that. So really developing a clear understanding of that ecosystem and all of the key interlock points that occur from brand to revenue is really important. So we've got a model that enables us to look at, that entire flow and look at the ecosystem that supports that. Now, we haven't perfected this by any stretch of the imagination, and it is a journey, not a destination type of approach. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly adapting because, again, the landscape we're operating across, as we've seen in recent times, is constantly evolving and changing on us. So, but having that sort of framework and that model that has flexibility built into it, that is agile enough to adapt, because it has to have the agility in there that can adapt to sort of changing needs of the business, is really important. So for us, we built this brand to revenue framework or model. It's an engine as such, I would say. Think of it as an engine. You've got core components in the engine. We've got the front end, so like I said, once we've built out an understanding of what our revenue targets are, our pipeline targets are, etc., we then start, okay, what are the messages, what are the audience segments we want to go after, what are the campaigns that we then need to think about building, and programs, campaigns, and tactics, and how they map against this engine is really important. And then we work basically looking at how our campaigns perform on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and use the insights coming out from the data to inform those decisions of where we need to make any adjustments. But the key there, just to close out that rather long answer to your question, is for that to work, there needs to be robust discourse taking place across all of the stakeholders involved in that. Because there's no one individual owns it. I guess you could say the MD owns the responsibility, and he or she's responsibility is to make sure everyone plays nicely with one another in terms of that happening. But if everyone's invested in that type of framework and understands their role, I find it really beneficial. It is a journey. It's not something you can just do in one quarter. I mean, I've been building the one I'm on now for a couple of years. So,
Got it. No, I appreciate that. And I think it's very fascinating to hear, how you approach it and how you put these frameworks in place. So I appreciate that. Okay. I have a couple of rapid questions that I want to ask you, right, before we wrap up. So the first question I want to ask you is, what is one resource? It could be a book, blog, podcast, talk, whatever it is that fundamentally has changed the way you work and live or live.
Well, aside from your podcast, of course, I would say I'm going to go Joe Rogan, actually, podcast. I've been a big fan of his for many years. I've listened to him for, it's at least 4 years now, 4 or 5 years. And I love the range of diverse thinkers he gets, so he has, economists, politicians, entertainers, comedians, business leaders, Elon Musk was on there not long back,
Elon Musk smoking weed. Yeah, that's right.
And it really is, I find it really interesting. And the diversity of thinking that comes across that podcast is amazing. And it, I often gets my brain juices fired up. So, he'd be the one that I'd say I find really interesting. Individual that challenges a lot of big topics that are being wrestled with out there. No.
All right, sounds good. Question number 2: if you could give only one advice to B2B marketers, what would it be?
One advice: be bold. Be bold. Step out be willing to step out on a tightrope without a safety net. I think if you want to make, put a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs said, you've got to be willing to be bold and take a step out on a tightrope without that safety net. I think that's one of the biggest fear factors I think a lot of people face, is being able to put themselves out there. And I think you got to be willing to do that, and to do that means, surrounding yourself as a leader with, smart people that might be smarter than you, and being comfortable with that, understanding what you don't know, and then building teams around you that help fill in the gaps of where you might have knowledge gaps or capability gaps. And also encourage that sort of mindset, and also enable them to, I don't know who said it, but fail fast, fail often, fail fast, fail forward. Someone said once, and I really like that. So having that mindset, I think, is really important. So be bold. Yeah.
Question number 3.
Yeah.
And what are the influencers that you follow in the marketing space? And you can't say Joe Rogan.
No, that's easy. Martin Lindstrom's a big one. He really influenced me early on. He wrote a great book called Brand Washed. He's written loads of great books, so I'd read every one of his books. David Rowan, another guy, he's a great Wired editor. He wrote a great book, No Bullshit Innovation. Highly recommend that as a read. Gary Hamel, he wrote the first book of his I read was Leading the Revolution, I think it's called. And he's a management thinker, so fantastic thinker. Brené Brown, she's great as well. Dare to Lead, I think, is her book. Last one, Nancy Duarte. She's also fantastic. I really into presentations. I love presenting, and she's got a great set of books on how to create, impactful stories and presentations. So there's a few.
That's awesome. That's plenty. I love it. I've got to put those in the show notes. So, all right. Last question. Question number 4 is, what is something that excites you today about B2B?
Just the speed of change. The speed of change again, Gary Hamel, I think, said this, change is changing in itself. And that excites me. I think in terms of the pace of change, each day you wake up, I think we were saying this earlier before we started, there's never a dull day. Yeah. There's always something happening. And I think the B2B world in particular is changing. We're seeing the consumerization of technology. We're seeing the consumer, sort of the expectations that we have as consumers porting their way over into the B2B world. As a B2B buyer now, I want that Apple experience. I want that, the same experience that I get in Burberry, or wherever it is I go to, that provides a sort of a high touch sort of, experiential type experience. I want that in the B2B space now. So this is the challenge for us as B2B marketers. How do we step up to that challenge? Yeah. And that's quite exciting, I think.
It is. It very much is. I love that. Nicholas, this has been an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting points that you raised and we covered. So thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, matey. And look forward to hopefully getting to catch up with you in person at some point when I'm down in Australia next.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Nicholas.
Cheers, matey. No worries.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving us that 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and sharing the pod with a friend. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please make sure to join the community Slack channel at growthcolony.org/Slack. growthcolony.org/Slack. Thanks again for all the support, and we're looking forward to seeing you again in the next one.